April 30, 1918. A weary soldier in the trenches of the Western Front awoke from a night's rest with his eyes wide open. Yet his mind was a blank canvas, his body a motionless statue. Within weeks, dozens of his comrades suffered the same fate, and the world would soon confront a baffling, sleeping sickness that would haunt medicine for generations. This was the birth of the Encephalitis Lethargica epidemic, a mysterious neurological disease that surged across continents from 1917 to the early 1920s, leaving a trail of patients locked in a statue-like stupor for years, sometimes decades. The first whispers of the illness emerged in the winter of 1916, when physicians in Vienna noted a cluster of patients who complained of profound lethargy, fever, and a peculiar mask that distorted facial expressions. By early 1917, Dr. Konstantin von Economo, an Austrian neurologist, began to piece together a pattern. He described a syndrome marked by excessive sleep, eye movement abnormalities, and a characteristic pseudobulbar effect, where patients would burst into uncontrollable laughter or weeping with no apparent trigger. The disease spread like a phantom, leaping from war-torn Europe to the bustling streets of New York, the colonial outposts of India, and the remote villages of South America. By 1920, estimates suggested that up to 1 in 10,000 people worldwide had been touched by the epidemic. What made encephalitis lethargica so terrifying was its uncanny ability to freeze the human spirit in a state of suspended animation. Victims would drift into a sleep that lasted days, weeks, or even years, only to awaken with a stiff, mask-like face, a stare that seemed to pierce the void, and a profound loss of motor control. Some could barely lift a finger. Others walked with a shuffling gait reminiscent of a puppet on invisible strings. The disease spared no social class. Soldiers returned from the front lines with the syndrome, as did factory workers, aristocrats, and schoolchildren. Newspapers ran headlines proclaiming a sleeping plague, and families whispered in hushed tones about relatives who vanished into a permanent dream. The medical community launched an urgent quest to understand the cause. Early hypotheses ranged from a post-influenza viral invasion, given the epidemic's overlap with the 1918 Spanish flu, to autoimmune reactions triggered by bacterial infections. Laboratories in Paris, Berlin, and Boston examined cerebrospinal fluid, searching for pathogens, while psychiatrists debated whether the condition might be a form of mass hysteria. The lack of consistent laboratory markers made diagnosis a matter of clinical observation alone. Dr. von Economo, armed with his keen bedside skills, identified 3 clinical subtypes: the somnolent form, the hyperkinetic form where patients displayed agitation and involuntary movements, and the chronic form that led to the iconic, Parkinsonian, rigidity seen in later years. In 1924, a landmark trial took place at the Royal Infirmary of Edinburgh, where a cohort of 24 patients was subjected to a regimented series of therapeutic experiments. Physicians administered high-dose antipyretics, induced hyperventilation, and even tried nascent forms of electroconvulsive therapy, hoping to wake the dormant brains. The trial yielded little success. Some patients improved marginally, while others deteriorated into deeper stupor. The most striking observation was that a small subset of patients, after prolonged periods of inactivity, began to exhibit sudden, spontaneous movements, twitches that blossomed into full-blown choreiform dance. These movements would later be recognized as the earliest documented cases of post-encephalitic Parkinsonism, a clue that the disease was striking deep within the basal ganglia. Autopsies performed on deceased patients provided the first tangible evidence of the disease's pathophysiology. In 1927, Dr. James W. H. Sutherland at the University of Michigan dissected the brain of a 38-year-old woman who had spent 12 years in a catatonic state. The examination revealed a striking inflammation of the midbrain tegmentum, a thickened, grayish meninges, and the presence of paravascular lymphocytic infiltrates. Similar findings were reported by French neuropathologists who noted a predilection for the substantia nigra, a region critical for dopamine production. The loss of pigmented neurons in this area explained the Parkinsonian rigidity that haunted survivors long after the acute phase had passed. Yet, no viral particles or bacterial colonies were identified, leaving the etiological mystery intact. As the 1920s waned, the epidemic gradually receded, perhaps quelled by the waning of the post-influenza immune response, or by the natural ebb of the pathogen, if one existed. The number of new cases plummeted, and by the early 1930s, the world thought it had escaped the clutches of the sleeping plague. However, the legacy persisted. Survivors lived out their lives with chronic neurological deficits. Families bore the burden of caring for loved ones locked in a perpetual twilight. In 1934, the famed neurologist Dr. Oliver Sacks would later recount a patient, the man who lost his mind but not his soul, whose life became a testament to the resilience of the human brain, despite the damage wrought by encephalitis lethargica. The epidemic also sparked a revolution in neuroscience. The meticulous clinical descriptions by von Economo inspired a generation of neurologists to map the brain's functional anatomy. The discovery that a viral-like illness could target specific neural circuits paved the way for modern studies of neuroinflammation and autoimmunity. Decades later, researchers would revisit archived tissue samples with electron microscopy and polymerase chain reaction techniques, hunting for hidden viral genomes. Although a definitive culprit remains elusive, the Encephalitis Lethargica saga continues to inform contemporary investigations into mysterious neurodegenerative diseases such as chronic fatigue syndrome and post-viral Parkinsonism. Subscribe to the Autopsy Files for more stories like this.